Good morning, everybody. Welcome to In Tune. My name is Leon Harrell, and this is our live stream focused on intentional practice for music. Today, we're going to be talking about Chopin's Funeral March. We're going to do that in a software called Piano Marvel, which we'll talk a little bit about throughout the show today. If you are joining us for the first time, say hello in the comments. I see a lot of people already there this morning. I see David and Don and Carol. It's so great to see you all again this morning. And yeah, if you have questions throughout the show, put them in the chat window. The whole point of the show is to be interactive and answer the questions you have. This morning, before we get started, let's think, are there any announcements? I don't think so. Today we'll do Chopin's Funeral March. Next week will actually be our last Halloween episode. Next Saturday is Halloween, and I'm thinking of doing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but I'm open to it. If you have sort of a Halloween classic you're interested in learning, let me know in the comments. But other than that, we're going to get started pretty soon. I've got my cup of coffee. I've always got my cup of coffee. Let's just take a look in the comments before we get rolling to see, are there any questions? All right, yeah, so I just say hello, see hellos and good mornings. Okay, good deal. Well, let's jump right into it. I'm going to switch over to Piano Marvel, and if you want to join along, we do this every Saturday at 10 a.m. I encourage you to download a free trial of Piano Marvel. So if you go to the link you see on the screen, oneminutemusiclesson.com/Piano Marvel, you'll be able to download a 30-day free trial. And if you decide to continue the trial by using my affiliate code that's in there, you'll get an additional 20% off your subscription. So that's a good deal if you decide to move forward with that. But we'll go ahead and hide that from the screen. And this is what the software looks like. We're inside of the music library component. The library itself has, I want to say, 25,000 pieces of music. So there's a ton of music. And this month we've been focusing primarily on Halloween themed music, just to keep it fun and light. So the piece we're going to do today is Chopin's Funeral March, and this particular piece comes from Chopin's Piano Sonata, I want to say number 2 in B flat. I could be wrong on the number, but I think it's number 2. So this is the third movement from that piece. Very popular piece that most everybody's heard through television and cartoons and commercials and things like that. So I'm sure you'll recognize the piece. The original piece, I tell you what, I did a little investigation this week, and I'm going to open that up. I want to say, I know it's in a flat key, but let's see if I can remember, pull up to see what key it's in. Let's see. I looked at the IMSLP, which is the International Music Score Library Project, and I found Chopin's original manuscript, which if you'll give me just a second, I'll pull that up. For some reason that's not loading quickly for me, but that's okay. Let's take a look. Let's see, I got a question coming in. Good morning, James. Great to see you again. Let's see. Let's open this Chopin manuscript. Let's take a look. I'm going to share that with you as well. I think you see that. So here we see the original manuscript of this piece. This piece is probably hard for you to see because the pen is very light on the paper. But this is in the key of B flat minor, which is the same key signature as D flat major. You can see that's 5 flats. And it's so interesting to look at these manuscripts to see how do these pieces look in comparison to maybe easy arrangements that we look at on the show. Hey, good morning, Sandy. Welcome. The thing I thought that was interesting about this, you can see some musical markings that you don't see very often. I'm going to zoom in so you can see that a little bit better. So for example, we see some repeat marks. I don't know that I could draw on this, but in this first measure, you'll see that it looks like a division sign. That just means repeat the measure before. Other things, I think it's interesting to look at Chopin's manuscript here. You'll see he's doing what most composers do, which is probably writing rather quickly, so the note heads are actually on the wrong side of the stem in the left hand, which is fine. When I'm composing, I move along pretty quickly too. I'm not too worried about that sort of thing. But I thought that was so fascinating to look at. So if you're interested in that, that is IMSLP. I'm going to throw that in the IMSLP, and I'm pretty sure that's .org. So if you want to take a look at that, there's tons of free scores because most of this stuff is going to be in public domain, which is older than roughly 1925 or so. And you'll find lots of cool stuff. The other thing you'll see here on the screen, maybe we'll talk about this for a brief second. I'm actually in the process of arranging this month's easy arrangement for our patrons. So if you are interested in supporting the show or learning more about that, you can just go to oneminutemusiclesson.com/support. You'll see a link to our Patreon page, and every month we send out an easy arrangement of a popular tune. And this month we're doing Charles Gounod's Funeral March of a Marionette, Marche Funèbre d'une Marionnette. I'm sure I'm butchering the French there. But, if you're interested in that, check that out. So I'm going to hide that and switch back over to Piano Marvel. And we're going to open Funeral March by Chopin. And we're going to go through this using our SMART method, which we talked about on several of our recent episodes. But I'll bring that acronym up on the screen. So the acronym is SMART, and we'll use that before we sight read any piece of music. And what it does is it just sort of gets us acclimated and ready to go to play these pieces. So let's take a look at that acronym. All right, so the acronym is SMART, and that stands for scale, meter, accidentals, range, and tempo. So the first thing we want to do is look at what is the scale of the piece. So we're going to look at that. Let's switch back. This piece has no key signature up front. All right, and as we've talked about before, there's two basic choices when we're talking about what key is a piece in, or what is the key signature telling us. So it's either major or minor. And when there's no key signature, meaning there's no sharps, there's no flats, if it's major, it's C major, and if it's minor, it's A minor. And there's a couple flavors of minor, but to keep things simple, this is considered a natural minor. So how do we know that? The natural minor, I'll switch back and show you, has no sharps and flats, so it's the same as in the key of A minor. So it's the same as C major. All right, so when we look at this scale, this is A natural minor. Before we read the music, I play through the scale a couple times, and depending on your skill level, you might decide to play this. If you're a beginner, just play it with one finger. So and take a listen to the sound. I'm going to play a little on my keyboard, and if for any reason you're not hearing the sound of my keyboard, let me know. I'm trying a slightly different setup this morning, but I think it will be fine. So here's the sound of that A natural minor. And then we'll play it coming down. All right, so A natural minor. And how did I know that? So we look at the music, and like I said, there's no key signature. That's the main indicator. But other things we look for are some context clues. So we want to look at generally, what is the first and last chord of the piece? That will also usually indicate what key the piece is in. All right, so if we look at that first chord, from bass to soprano, we've got A in the bass, and E in the tenor voice, and an A in, technically it's the soprano, it's the top note, but typically an alto would sing, the alto voice would have something so low. All right, so we've got A, E, and A. Sounds like so. All right, so we really just have a perfect fifth and an octave there. There's not actually a third to the chord, which we would expect to be hearing C. All right, that doesn't come in until measure 3. All right, so really we've got A minor in the beginning, or an A open. You might see that in some chord books might call it an open chord. All right, and then let's look at the end of the piece. It ends exactly the same way. All right, so that's telling us we're in A minor. And then to determine sort of what flavor of minor that is, we look for other context clues. Are there other sharps or flats? Is there a leading tone? So a leading tone is whatever key we're in. This is A natural minor, so the A is the tonic or the resting tone for the key. And then the leading tone is just the half step below that, so G sharp. G sharp will lead us back to A. But in this case, we don't see a leading tone anywhere, and that's okay because every piece doesn't have that sort of thing. We'll have a leading tone in major keys and melodic or harmonic minor, but in natural minor, there is no leading tone. The leading tone has been flatted to be just G natural. Okay, so that's some context clues to tell us what scale is the piece in. And again, if you're a beginner, just play through the scale. It doesn't matter what fingers you use. Ultimately, it's important what fingers to play on the keyboard. Or if you're playing another instrument, you know, just use the knowledge level you have right now just to get started. Okay, if you are a little bit more advanced when we're looking at this scale, go ahead and play 2 octaves. It'll sound like this. Play that at whatever tempo or speed is comfortable for you. I recommend much slower than what I just played there. All right, so that is our scale. Let's talk about our meter. So this piece is in 4/4, and 4/4 is, let's see, I'm going to go back to page 2 here. 4/4 is considered a simple meter. All right, and if you're not aware of what that means, there's 2 basic types of meters, simple and compound. But there's more types of meter that we generally don't talk about a lot on this show because they're a little bit more advanced. But in this case, 4/4 is a simple meter, and a simple meter just means that the beat is divided into 2 equal pieces. And we'll look for that in a moment in the score to see, is that the case here? But here is just a diagram to show you the beat, in this case, 4/4. The beat is equal to a quarter note. All right, so the number on top is telling us that there's 4 of these things, whatever they are, and the bottom number is telling us what is equivalent to the beat unit. So the bottom 4 is indicating that a quarter note is that. So if you imagine the bottom number as a fraction, so if you imagine 1 over the number 4, that would be 1/4 or 1/4. Let's see, got a comment rolling in here. Sandy says, I still don't have my iPad and MIDI able to work with Piano Marvel. Yeah, I tell you what, Sandy, I ordered my Bluetooth MIDI connector for iPad. It's a Yamaha something. I'll have to figure out the serial number. But when I get that, hopefully this week, I'm going to write a product review on that just so I can share that with the newsletter. Yeah, Piano Marvel works on the desktop, Windows or Mac, but it also works on iPad. And I've been using it for iPad to practice here and there, and I really like that because, of course, your iPad's so lightweight, you can just prop it on your keyboard or piano. You do not have to have a MIDI connection to use Piano Marvel with your iPad. You can use it in what's called book mode, which would just be like using a book. So you can track your own progress manually. So you don't get all the features of the MIDI connection, but it's still really useful. I still actually use that when I practice sometimes. But I do like to use the computer connected for the scoring and all that. Again, when we're looking at 4/4, this is a simple meter, and we are dividing the beat unit, which in this case is the quarter note, into 2 equal parts. So conceptually, that looks like this. All right, so we would have a total of 8 eighth notes in a whole measure of 4/4, and we would count it like so: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So coming back to 1. So I'm reading that sort of around this circle. In this piece, we'll also see that the beat division, the eighth note, divided further into the subdivision. So we're going to divide the eighth notes into 2 equal 16th notes. So in that case, we'll count it 1 E and 2 E and So we say E and to divide it, the beat unit, into 4 equal pieces. All right, we're going to look at our score. Let's look at our score. We'll talk through that kind of slowly so you can conceptualize it. All right, and if we look at just the first measure right there on beat 2, we have a dotted eighth note in the soprano there and a 16th note. All right, so if we're counting this first measure, and I'll highlight it. If we're counting this first measure, just counting the soprano, we're going to count 1, 2, E, and on the 16th note, 3, 4. All right, so the counting is 1, 2, E, and 3, 4. If we look at measure 3, which is the hardest measure in the whole piece, or the most confusing, I think, we'll see there is a 32nd note at the very end. Typically, once we divide beyond the subdivision level, so we've got the beat level up top is the quarter note. If you divide that in half is the division, so the 2 eighth notes. If you divide the eighth notes into half, you've got the 16th note. So we'd have 4 of those, 1 E and And if we go beyond that, another division level, we'll have 32nd notes. We typically don't see 32nd notes a ton in music. Not because they're not necessary, but you don't see the beat divided that small in a lot of cases. Because you can accomplish that with music notation in other types of ways. And a lot of times you'll see little tiny notes called grace notes or appoggiaturas. And that's what we see in the PDF version of this piece. We'll look at that in just a moment too. So really, you don't necessarily have to count the 32nd note. But if you want to, a lot of times I'll just use the syllable ta to break that up. So the rhythm would sound 1, 2 E and 3, 4 E and ta 1. So I'll add the ta in there to get the 32nd note. But let's take a look at the difference between what it's showing us on the screen here versus this PDF. You'll see the PDF icon. Most pieces in Piano Marble will also come with a PDF version of the piece. And I love that as a teacher and player because I can print the music and I can use my pencil and highlighters and colored pencils to make notations on the music. I highly recommend that. If you've read through my book, How to Read Music Easily in 30 Days, I talk about that all throughout the book. And I give you some visual examples towards the end of how I mark my music when I'm sight reading something that's a little bit more challenging than this. But if you look at this example from the PDF, this is a lot more accurate to what we might see in typical notation. So at measure 4, right on the downbeat, we'll see there's a little grace note right before the B in the soprano voice. So rather than squeezing in the 32nd note at the end of the measure, they've just put it on the downbeat of the next measure as a grace note. Literally, it'll sound just about the same no matter how you notate that. But this method, as you're seeing here in the PDF version, this is much more standard, and this is what you'll expect to see in most music notation. Sandy asked a great question. I'm going to add that to the broadcast here. Can you open your own music file in Piano Marvel? Yes, you can. So in order to do that, you'll need two different things. And I'll demonstrate it real quick. If we go to the dashboard, we'll go into the library. And at the bottom of the library, you'll see an option to create and upload. So this is where you would add music to Piano Marvel. So let's say you're a composer or arranger, or you just find some music online that you want to learn and you want to use Piano Marvel to help in that learning process. You would upload your music here. And the key things you really just need to know is that you have to have the music in XML format, which can be exported from MuseCore or Finale, or I think Sibelius as well. Most notation programs can export in that format, XML. The other thing you'll need is a MIDI file, MIDI. So the purposes of these two things is the MIDI file is the data that tells the computer what note to play. The XML file contains all the other information about the score, so like the crescendo marks or the dynamics, forte, piano, all those little markings. So I use MuseCore right now for doing that stuff, which is a free product. I'll put the name of that in the comments. MuseScore is how it's pronounced. Because that's free and open source, anyone can use that. Is it my favorite notation program? No, but other ones are more expensive, and typically most people aren't interested in spending quite the amount of money that it costs, but my favorite is Sibelius. I definitely recommend Sibelius. If you are interested in that kind of thing, it's well worth the money if you're interested in using it a lot. But MuseCore gets the job done, and it can upload right into Piano Marvel. Okay, so closing out of that, let's look at, we've looked at our scale. We've talked about our meter. We'll go back into that score. So our scale is A natural minor. Our meter is 4/4. We're counting at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And the next thing is we're going to look for accidentals. So this piece, as we scan through, no accidentals. So practically speaking, if we're sitting at a keyboard or piano, it means every note is played on a white key. For other instruments, you're welcome, Sandy. For other instruments, that doesn't necessarily translate into some sort of simple visual reference. Music notation tends to be based primarily on the piano keyboard. So that's why we see most method books teaching in C major or A natural minor for these easier beginning pieces. But in this case, there's no accidentals. There's nothing to alter from the notes we're reading. All right, so then we're going to look at the range. All right, so the range is really what's the highest and lowest note. So I just do that by scanning from the beginning. So the first note is A in the treble clef, and that's a little bit below. It's in the alto range. It's a little bit lower than you might see in a lot of pieces because it's on a ledger line that's below the treble clef. So we're 2 ledger lines down, which is the A just below middle C. But there are many pitches that are lower than that in the piece. So if we look at the first note in the bass, we've got A below middle, 2 octaves below middle C. That's pretty low. Let's see if there's anything lower than that as we scan through. No, that's the lowest. Okay, so we're just going to see that as the lowest pitch. The highest pitch, though, it looks like in measure 11. All right, we've got the A 2 octaves above middle C. All right, so if we're thinking of the range of this piece, it's from this A to, not the A just below middle C, but an octave below that A. All right, and then up to the A two octaves above the middle C there. All right, so it's a good range. That's probably about half the keyboard. So I just recommend you situate your body in front of the keyboard, just sort of at the midpoint between those two notes. That way you really have no reason to move or lean too much. You'll be able to easily reach all the notes you need to play. Okay, our last component of our acronym SMART is the time or the tempo. So we will, I'll put that back on the screen so you can just see the acronym easily. Our tempo in this case is going to be very slow, and Piano Marvel marks that tempo. Let's see. The piece itself in the software doesn't say a tempo number. Typically, we expect to see our tempo at the beginning of the piece of music. All right, but in the practice mode, I'm going to click on practice. All right, it's telling us if we play the whole piece at full tempo, it's 65 is what they recommend. I think 65 is a little bit fast for this piece. Chopin's manuscript marks it as grave or grave, which just means extremely slow. But there's plenty of room for interpretation there. I might play this maybe at 60. Seems a little more accurate to me, but you know, that's just a detail. All right, so our tempo, we'll sight read this probably at 50, I want to say. And what we want to do is prepare before we play anything. We want to get our mind and our body ready. And the problem I see so many students have, and adult learners, when they sit at the piano or their instrument and they're ready to play, as soon as it's time to play that first note, their body tenses up, they freeze, they get paralyzed, they are so concerned they're going to make a mistake that there's just sort of been this like little zap in their brain and they've forgotten everything. So a way I manage to get around that a lot of times is to just count 2 measures, and that sounds so simple. But it really is helpful to have 2 full measures of count in. I find that the first measure gives you time to have that if you're a person that has that reaction, you have the reaction, you've counted through the first measure, and then your second measure, you're actually focusing and you're getting ready to play the music. So counting 2 measures in is very helpful for that. If you're a beginner and 2 measures just isn't enough to counteract that, count more measures in. There's no rush into playing the first note. What we're trying to do when we sight read is stay very calm in our body and our mind so that we can use all of our focus, our energy to focus on reading the notes, moving our hands in the right position, and counting, ideally out loud with the rhythm, which is a lot to juggle, even for people that have played for a while. So you want to count in and sight read at the appropriate level that you're at. So if you are just starting, I recommend you just follow along and count the meter itself. So that would sound and look like this. We would just count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as I'm doing that, my eyes will be following along the little cursor we see on the screen. And what that's doing for you as a beginner is getting you used to moving along in the music at the correct tempo. The other things we want to think about, if you are quite capable to do what I just described, the next thing I might just have you do if you're working on trying to sight read better is just say the names of the pitches in rhythm. And if clapping along helps you, clap along. If clapping along is one extra thing that's too much, don't do that. But for example, it might sound like this in that first 2 measures. I would count 1. I would say the names of the notes, which it starts on A. A, 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 etc. And I would just read the notes that way. If you're capable to do that, move on to just playing it with your instrument. And this is where you decide, well, do I want to read the right hand only before I try the left hand? Or do I want to read them together? So reading hands together is sort of the highest level there of sight reading. We will sight read just the right hand to get started. And we're going to look at the practice features. Again, if you click the word practice at the bottom, you will see 3 levels. We've got the whole piece, the chopped piece, which just means broken up into phrases, and then the minced version. The minced version is typically where we'll see the right hand and the left hand separated by phrases. So I'm going to put us on the minced mode, and we're going to do exercise number 1, which is measures 1 through 4, right hand. We'll do it at 50 beats a minute. 30 beats per minute is pretty slow, and you may actually find, even if you're a beginner, when the tempo is so slow, it's hard to stay focused because you're not used to things moving that slowly. So we'll do it at 50. All right, so let's take a look. And again, as I warned you, measure 3 is the most confusing in the piece, and it returns the second measure from the end and measure 13 both have these 30-second notes. All right. I'm going to say the syllable ta on that, but of course we could handle that differently. We'll talk about 2 different ways to play that. Okay, so let's do that together. Hands up. I'm going to just say the notes this time so you can follow along that way. So I'll count 2 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here we go. 1, 2 E and a 3, 4. 1, 2 E and a 3, 4. 1, 2, a 3, 4 E and a to 1, a 2, a 3, 4. All right, so I did that counting. I was supposed to say the pitches. Let's do it with the pitches this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. A, 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 C, B, C, B, A, 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 A. All right, so you'll notice measure 3 is harder to do. It's probably harder to count it and to say the pitch names than to just play it on the keyboard, because really you're just twiddling two notes, 2 fingers there on the keyboard. So it's actually easier to play it than to say it and count it. Let's do that together. I'll play it this time, just the right hand. I'm going to do this in prepare mode. So there's 2 modes in Piano Marvel. We've got prepare and assess. Prepare mode lets you be the driver of the forward motion. So as you play the notes correctly, the cursor is going to move forward. That prepare mode is excellent for learning the pitches of the sheet music and being self-reliant to play the rhythm correctly. The assess mode, the software moves it forward for you, and the software is playing along, usually an accompaniment along with it, which is good to help you make sure you're playing the correct rhythm and moving along in tempo as well. But when you first are looking at a new piece in Piano Marvel, I would recommend you do the prepare mode. So I'm going to click on prepare. All right, and then I'll do my own count in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, a 3, 4. 1, 2, a 3, 4. 1, 2, a 3, 4. A to 1, a 2, a 3, 4. All right, and if you're playing along and you're doing it in Piano Marvel, in prepare mode, you have to be very precise, very technical, so that the software can assess you correctly. And what I mean by that, just in practical terms, when we're pressing our notes down, let me move my hand where you can see it. We want to make sure that there's a little space between every note. If we play too legato, if everything's very connected, sometimes the software can't tell that you've lifted your finger. All right, and that's only for the purpose of preparing. When it's time for assessing, it's a little bit, it scores it a different way. Okay, so I'll do that one more time so you can follow along, because pretty much the first 4 measures of the piece, most of the material repeats or is modified in some way based on that. So let's do that one more time together. We'll go into, if you're following along, this is the practice mode, minced exercise 1 at 50 beats per minute. Okay, I'm doing prepare. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. A, 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 C, B, C, B, A, 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 A. All right. Okay, so if you're brand new to reading music, or this is, you're not quite to this level of reading yet, I recommend my students print the PDF version out and write in the note names, or write in some of the note names. A lot of people who've taken lessons before, or they've worked with teachers before, there tends to be this philosophy that if students are writing in the names of the notes on their score, they're not learning it, and I don't find that to be true at all. So for almost a decade, I taught at colleges throughout the Midwest, and I've taught some remedial courses for graduate students in music. And I mean, you would be surprised how many people can play an instrument beautifully, and they still struggle to read the actual music. So I think of writing in the notes or writing in the rhythms as just sort of a bridge that gets you from where you are to where you're trying to go with your skill level. So take the time to print that and do that if that's what you need to get to this level. David puts in a comment here, Dead March of Saul. David, you had sent me a good question this week. What is the Chopin Funeral March related in some way to Handel's Funeral March? I couldn't find anything that indicated that they are, but maybe they are. I don't know the piece from Saul by Handel that well, so I could certainly take a listen to see, but nothing in just a quick couple Google searches indicated they were related, but it's very possible. I just don't know that Handel's piece very well, but good comment there. The next thing we want to do, so we've looked at measures 1 through 4. Let's look at our practice mode. And now we're going to take a look at measures 5 through 8 in the right hand as well. We'll do this one again at 60 beats per minute, or 50. Is this 50? Let's see, what was that marked at? Yeah, 50. So we have another phrase of the music, and this is pretty much going to take care of the rest of the piece of music. So we've got a repeat of the first motive there, but this time in parallel thirds, meaning that the alto and soprano are moving in parallel motion with each other. And then we'll look at the last 2 measures here. We see our alto voice has 2 half notes, while our soprano has more action up top. So the thing I would tell you as a sight reader, it's very tempting and very easy to get accustomed to the pattern of rhythm. And then you stop counting and you're just playing the patterns that you've already played. So this is a good example in measure 7 where the pattern breaks, and that's why it's important to be counting during this part. So we'll count this together, but the counting, we've got our beat is the quarter note, our division is the 8th note, and our subdivision is the 16th note. I'm going to count the 16th notes the whole time. And what this will do is it will keep our tempo steady. So by counting the division or the subdivision continuously, it's easier to keep the tempo correct. But it's also preparing us for the changes coming up before they arrive. So if I count, for example, starting here, beat 3 of measure 6, I would be counting 3E and 4E, and so that when we land on the downbeat here, we're counting 1E and 2E and 3 on the half note there. Okay, and that will make more sense when we do this in practice. All right, so let's do measures 5 through 8 in prepare mode. Counting out loud, I'm just going to clap the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. All right, and I'll play it along now because the software's waiting for me to play. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. All right. So you can see there that dotted rhythm pattern, da 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 da, is broken at measure 7, and it's changed into da 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 da. All right. So he's evened out those 8th note rhythms. Okay. So after we prepare, the software goes in and scores. How well did you prepare? Okay. So really, that's it for the right hand. The only differences through the rest of the piece, we'll play that same melody in different octaves. All right, so we'll take a look. Let's go back to the whole piece. This original theme in the right hand, da, 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 this is just repeated at a different octave at the end, so an octave lower. Okay. Excuse me, let me take a sip of coffee. The other thing to take a look at in this piece is the left hand. So this is a great piece for a beginner to work on working on the tension control for your left hand. So what I mean by that is when we play something that's repetitive, and particularly this exact figure where we've got fingers 5, which is your pinky, 4, 3, 2, which is your pointer finger, and 1 is your thumb. Your thumbs are always 1 for piano fingerings. But what we're going to do is play the left hand, and we're playing these 2 fingers, the pinky and the pointer finger, 5 and 2, and then we're alternating to 4, your ring finger and your thumb, 4 and 1. So if we were to just alternate doing that, that is a very tricky motion for the hand to do. And you can see as I alternate between these 2 hand positions, even for me, this is really hard to keep very steady and fluid because as you try it, if you try it yourself, it's kind of like that feeling of doing the Star Trek symbol or whatever that is. Like, you can't do it the first time you try it. You really have to consciously give it a good effort to do it. But when you're playing the keyboard and you're actually playing the notes while you're doing this, you will feel your hand tense up because you're using muscles and combinations that are not typical for like day-to-day things you do with your hands. So I'm going to play that on the keyboard. It sounds like so. All right, and this is just the same pattern repeats throughout the entire piece in the left hand. Alright, so that's called an ostinato. Alright, so an ostinato, a repeating pattern that's pretty persistent. And as you play it, you'll feel the tension start to build up in your hand or your arm or your elbow. You might notice your shoulders starting to like kink up because you're focusing so hard to play the notes and do that hand position. You've lost total awareness of your body. So when we play piano and we sight read, that's part of the struggle. Is like you have to remain aware of your body. You want to remain calm, good posture, no tension. The secret to playing any instrument is removing the tension. And it's hard because you're so focused on all the moving parts of music. Okay, but let's take a look at that first left hand part. All right, so we've got the pitches from the bottom to the top. A, and E, that perfect fourth, perfect fifth. And then we're alternating C and F. All right, a perfect fourth. All right, and we're just alternating, rocking back between the two. Now, if you find that this is far beyond your ability and level, you might just try the bass notes, just the bottom notes, so just the A and the C. That'll be much easier to do. All right, if you want to step it up just a notch, play the A and the E together, but alternate with just the C by itself. All right, and then when you're ready, add back in the F. All right, now one way to practice this to allow you to get comfortable with the left hand motion, all right, but not overwhelming yourself with the right hand, is to play the left hand while you speak or say ta for the rhythm in the right hand. So it might sound like this. Ta, 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 ta. Ta, 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 ta. Measure 3. Ta, 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 ta. Ta, 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 ta. Like so. So you can practice these things in lots of different ways to break it down based on your skill level. But let's go ahead, let's scan through the rest of the piece. You'll see the left hand is exactly the same all the way through the piece till the very end. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play this complete piece, left hand, right hand. Play along with me, clap along with me, count, whatever skill level you're at. But we're going to do this in assessment mode. All right.
1, 2.
Here we go.
Set. Go.
Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong thing selected here. We're going to go to practice mode. I'm going to do the whole thing at 50. All right, and now it's going to assess this properly. All right, so even that is too fast. I don't know if you got my newsletter this week, but I sent out a version of this I found by, I forget the pianist's name, but it's typically played a lot slower. It sounds more like this. So that might even be slower than 50. But let's sight read it at 50. Here
1,
we go.
2. Set. Go.
Parallel thirds. right, so just a couple flubs along the way there, and some things, these are mostly just the timing's off a little bit. I did notice as I played this, measure 9, you might want to be aware, it was very tempting to repeat the C from the alto voice here when I played the alto voice in measure 9. So that's an A there, not a C. But your thumb is in that position. It's very tempting to just repeat the note there. Okay, so if you have questions or comments about this piece, throw them in the chat window, just so we have a chance to talk about that. I'm going to switch over here to our mailbag. So we had a question come in. David, this was your question. You had asked me. I'm going to pull it up on my phone real quick. You had asked about a piece in Piano Marvel called Halloween at its Best, which is a collection of Halloween songs in Piano Marvel. There's tons of Halloween songs in here, so I'm going to switch over to that. Let's look at it in Piano Marvel, and I just searched for Halloween at its Best, which is a set of books. So when I click on that, the question you asked comes from book number 1, and then the piece is called Halloween Boo with an exclamation point. And David asked a good question. When you look at this piece, you'll see some symbols in the notation that you may not have seen before. So the first question he asks is, in the beginning, you'll see these are in red. They're typically not red. All these symbols are just black in printed music. But the first thing you see, it says 8VA, and then we see another one over here, 8VA. All right, so what does that mean? So what that means is up the octave, or octava. I had to pull out my music dictionary, Essential Music Dictionary. This is the Essential Dictionary of Music Notation. It's put out by Alfred. I got a copy of this book when I was doing my master's degree. I went to University of Louisville for composition, because the whole book is telling you every little detail about how you should notate things in printed music. So I pulled out the book and I looked up the octavo signs. And where did I find that? Let me see if I can find that quickly. The octave signs. So 8VA, of course, is an octave above. Typically, you'll see it printed above the line there. But 8VA just means at the octave, I think. So where the line is placed tells you something. So 8VA with the line above is an octave above, with the line below is an octave below. But typically, you'll see 8VB if it's an octave below. But that's an American thing, apparently. I didn't realize that when I read through the dictionary here. So the 8VA with the line below is also an octave below. But a lot of times you'll see 8VB, which is shorthand for 8VA basso, or a bass octave below. So that was a good question, David, because it's been a while since I looked at the details of that. I kind of forgot about that. But it's also in my book. I'll tell you the page number too. Let me pull that up on my phone. So this is on page 91 of my book. And if you haven't seen it before, I have a book, How to Read Music Easily in 30 Days. You can find that at the link here on your screen. And I go through teaching. I have a very different method of teaching music than most people, where you're sort of learning things with an exponential learning curve, meaning that the first bit of the book is really, really easy. And it goes on easy until the very end. It sort of spikes up, and it teaches you a lot of information that might take time to master, but it doesn't take time to learn the concepts. So anywho, that's at my website /book. The other part of your question, David, I'm going to go back to that. He asked, let's look at that in Piano Marvel. He asked, there are... right here, there's a treble clef sign in the bass clef. Anytime you're reading music, it doesn't matter what kind of music or what kind of instrument it is, you might start with one clef at the beginning, and then the clef might change somewhere in the piece of music. So wherever the clef changes, it means just read the notes in the new clef. So for example, here, if I'm looking in the bass clef, there's nothing to play there, but it's telling you now you've switched to treble clef. So these pitches are E, all right? And these particular pitches are E, an octave higher than that. This is a really tiny detail. You can see there's a little tiny number 8 at the top of that treble clef sign. So really, this is kind of it's telling you the same thing twice. It's telling you play these notes an octave above, but the clef itself is saying everything here is an octave above. So typically we don't see the combination of both of them, but you might find that. So then we'll switch back to bass clef right after that. You'll see here, this one, the piece starts 8 VA, notated with the treble clef with the 8 above it, so an octave higher, and then back to a regular treble clef here. So really, it's kind of unnecessary to put the 8 VA and the 8 together. I'm not exactly sure why it's notated that way. But again, you don't see the 8 above the treble clef very often at all. That's pretty rare. The 8 VA symbol, you'll see that lots in piano music. You'll find it in violin music sometimes, flute music, piccolo music, things where the instrument can play really high range stuff. Sandy's asking a good question. Is SMART in your book? SMART is something I'm doing in my new book. I'm working on a book called Smart Sight Reading. So it's the concepts are in the book, How to Read Music Easily in 30 Days, but I don't have it boiled down in quite the same way. But that's in a new book I'm working in. So that answers our questions from our mailbag. So the last things I want to say for today, let's... The piece we'll do next week, again, I think we're going to do Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata to wrap up. That will be our last Halloween episode on Halloween. I do want to take a moment to say a special thanks to our patrons. We have our patron Don. You're on the line today, which is awesome. So special thanks to all our patrons that help us achieve our mission at the 1 Minute Music Lesson, which is really to teach music literacy around the world. So thank you, Don, for that. And if you want to learn more about becoming a patron, visit 1minutemusiclesson.com/support. I'll tell you, every month we do an easy arrangement, like I said at the top of the hour. We're doing Charles Gounod's Funeral March of the Marionette, which everyone knows that piece because it's the theme song to the Alfred Hitchcock TV series, if you remember that. So thank you, Don, and our patrons. And I want to also say... everything we talk about on our show, all the tools we use, we've done tons of Piano Marvel lately, but I would like to do some episodes on Earmaster coming up pretty soon, which is an oral skills ear training software. And we've talked about my book. So all the things I recommend and exercises and freebies, things like that, I list them on my website in our toolbox. So I'll put a link to our toolbox up there. All right, and all of these products, there's very few products that I do recommend. So I've vetted all of them. I've used them in my teaching for years. And typically, a lot of these things have free trials. So I recommend you try these things before you buy them if you decide to. All right, so that is our toolbox. And I think that's going to wrap up our show for this morning. If you have questions or comments, feel free to throw them in. I'll be glad to hang around another minute or two. But that's going to be it for the show. Thanks for tuning in today, and thanks for joining us. If you have questions throughout the week, feel free to send them in. You can send them to our mailbag, so 1minutemusiclesson.com/mailbag, and we'll try to answer those right here live on the show. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday for another episode of In Tune. Take care, guys. Have a good one.